Tonight, shock and grief as a Manitoba community mourns a couple killed by wildfire.
It's terrible. It's just so hard to believe.
A husband and wife trapped in their home. Their son escaped but injured as the fires continued to rage. Court challenge. The Bloc calls for a by-election. In a riding, the Liberals won by a single vote.
We want this election to be held properly.
And sizing up the new cabinet, at issue is here. Plus, Canadian Tire moves to buy the Bay's iconic brands.
That's great. I mean, it's a Canadian history. You know.
The $30 million deal that could keep those famous strikes alive.
From CBC News, this is The National with Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault.
Thank you for joining us. Tonight, a tight-knit Manitoba community is grieving the sudden loss of a husband and wife killed as an out-of-control wildfire moved in Tuesday night. The couple's names are Sue and Richard Nowell. They had two adult sons, one who narrowly escaped the fire. The couple died on their family property, trapped as conditions became so extreme, police could not even attempt a rescue. There are several out-of-control wildfires in Manitoba, but it's this specific one by Lac du Bonnet, about 100 kilometers northeast of Winnipeg, that led to the deaths of the couple. Cameron McIntosh now with what we've learned about the lives that were lost and the swell of support from the community.
This is Grosdon Point near Lac du Bonnet on Tuesday as a wildfire swept through. It's the same area where Sue and Richard Nowell, shown here with their sons, were trapped on their property by a fast-moving fire and died. Flowers outside the cafe where Sue worked in Lac du Bonnet, a community stunned by loss. Shane McCoy and his wife were neighbors with the couple.
It's close friends, it's neighbors, and it's terrible. It's just so hard to believe.
Police say first responders couldn't reach the couple after a rescue call. At the Manitoba Legislature, the flag flying at half-mast.
My thoughts are with their son, Emmett, and his girlfriend, who were able to escape injured but safe.
We lost lives in Manitoba yesterday. This is a serious situation.
Manitoba's premier cautioning people to heed the advice of authorities. At least 1,000 people are out of their homes, with several communities declaring states of emergency, as the province shuts access to fire-prone areas.
I think everyone will understand that we are going to definitely take the cautious and safety-minded approach.
In Whiteshell Provincial Park, another fire bordering Manitoba and Ontario has already destroyed property. It too is growing. On the eve of the May long weekend, the park is under mandatory evacuation order, including cottages and campgrounds.
I understand, I said, with the conditions we have, that we have to have a shutdown in the park.
Back near Lac du Bonnet, the fires are far from under control. Manitoba is calling in out-of-province help, starting with 80 firefighters. On the ground, the extent of the loss is unclear. Michelle Potter captured these images while evacuating from the same area where the Nowells were killed.
I don't know what we're going back to. We're still evacuated, so we just wait right now.
Now, conditions are constantly changing. These fires are constantly moving. Some areas that were previously deemed under threat may not be anymore, and some early plans are being made to allow some people to go home.
And Cam, as we understand it, the Nowell family is already getting a lot of support through a GoFundMe.
Yeah, so you saw the picture of the two boys between their two parents in the early part of the story. We know that as the identities became public today, a GoFundMe was set up. An initial goal of $9,000 was set. Fundraising blew right past that. It's up to more like $70,000 right now. So definitely a lot of people wanting to support this family in a time of absolute tragedy.
Understandably. All right, Cam McIntosh in Winnipeg. The Bloc Québécois says it's going to court to try to force a by-election in the riding of Terrebonne. A judicial recount just took it out of BQ hands, saying the Liberals won by a single vote. But as Rafi Boudjikanian shows us, a returned ballot has the party questioning that.
It was the first time Emmanuelle Beausset tried voting by mail and likely her last. Je vois beaucoup des gens qui ont perdu confiance.
Many have lost faith in Elections Canada, including me, the Terrebonne resident says. The electoral body returned her mail-in ballot after last month's federal election due to its own error in printing the postal code. Her vote for the Bloc Québécois was not counted, in a riding where the Liberals have now won by a single vote.
Pour moi, c'est un peu une injustice.
Bossé calls it an injustice. Elections Canada declared the results final following a judicial recount.
We have to bring this situation in front of a judge.
But now, Bloc leader Yves-François Blanchet is challenging that, announcing his party will seek to have the Terrebonne results nullified in court to trigger a by-election.
There may be wrongdoing without the intention of performing wrongdoing. It's, of course, a mistake.
It's rare for Canadian election results to be contested in court. In 2011, the Supreme Court upheld a Conservative MP's 26-vote victory over a Liberal candidate's challenge. But for some political observers, this very narrow Liberal win means the Bloc could have a case.
The conclusion of a judge, well, it would suggest that we should, for sake of fairness, we should redo the election.
For the Bloc's would-be incumbent, it means another twist and more waiting.
It's a roller coaster. Nevertheless, I'm lucky to be well surrounded, not only by my party, but also by peers.
3 other ridings are subject to recounts, with the Liberals sitting 2 seats shy of a majority. Rafi Bujikani on CBC News, Ottawa.
And that issue is here with a lot more post-election politics. From the new Carney cabinet to the budget you will have to wait for, it's all just minutes away. Well, Hudson's Bay may be done as a department store, but those famous multicolored stripes may be coming soon to a Canadian Tire near you. Georgie Smythe now with a $30 million deal to preserve some of the iconic Canadian brand.
The iconic HBC stripes could now live on through Canadian Tire, with the company announcing an agreement to buy the Bay's logos, designs, coat of arms and trademarks for $30 million.
There's quite a bit of treasure there that can be used in the future by Canadian Tire.
In a statement, President and CEO of Canadian Tire said this choice feels as strategic as it feels patriotic. It builds on our generational connection to life in Canada, and it fits our new True North strategy. The deal comes after Canada's oldest company filed for creditor protection in March. It had been looking for buyers for parts of its business as it liquidated all 80 of its stores across the country. The Bay's CEO said, "We are grateful that the HBC brand has found a home with another heritage retailer that encapsulates the uniquely authentic Canadian experience." Canadian Tire is also bidding on some of the Bay's old locations, but it's unlikely to resurrect the retailer, says this analyst.
I think what they're going to do if they're bidding on leases, it's probably going to be for part of the lease, the Bay has, and they would probably look at it for a Canadian Tire store, a Sport Chek or a Mark's. I can't see them doing anything with the Bay in its former version of itself. This is going to be reincarnated differently.
Deep discounts brought many Canadians back into stores, and some shoppers there were happy to hear the news.
The Hudson Bay stays alive, that's great. I mean, it's a Canadian history, the heritage company, and I think it's great if it could stay alive.
As long as it lives on, that'll be a bit of a plus for sure. And Canada Tire is good too, a big company.
A court still needs to approve the deal, which wouldn't close until later this year. It's not known if money raised from the agreement will flow to workers fighting for severance pay. Georgie Smythe, CBC News, Vancouver.
Loblaw is warning the trade war will hit its shelves harder in the coming days, pushing up prices on thousands of additional products. As Anis Haidari explains, the longer the tariff chaos continues, the more consumers are paying for it.
$19.55. Your grocery store bill could be going up soon. At least for U.S. imports the Canadian government has tariffed. Warning coming from Canada's largest grocer, Loblaw. Its CEO has said its number of tariffed products is about to shoot up from 1,000 to 3,000 out of about 80,000 it stocks. In a LinkedIn post, Perbank wrote customers will start to see more impacts in non-produce categories like natural foods, pantry staples, health and beauty products, and more. Most vegetables and fruits are exempt from Canada's counter tariffs, but many dry goods and processed foods still face 25% charges. Independent players say cheaper pre-tariff inventory is running out.
Buckle up. We've already started to see the price increases. Remember, these counter tariffs went into effect in March. So as inventory became depleted, those goods had to be replaced if you did not have an alternative supplier.
Some of Loblaw's biggest competitors didn't directly address if price hikes are coming, but Metro and Sobeys both said they are working with their suppliers. So far, it's just Loblaw warning about future price hikes.
I think they're trying to get ahead of this.
This marketing expert says the grocer wants to avoid blame.
They're trying to do something that other retailers aren't doing, which is keep preparing the consumer for what's to come. Will consumers still respond positively because of that? Probably not, because at the end of the day, your grocery prices will be more expensive.
And in the U.S., Walmart giving similar warnings about U.S. tariffs on China.
And so what some retailers will do is they'll absorb a lot of that cost increase so that they can still flow that product, still be able to sell that.
With the U.S. trade war going global, one thing is clear. Some costs at your local supermarket will go up unless tariffs drop down. Anis Haidari, CBC News, Calgary.
Those American tariffs heavily influenced Ontario's new budget. The province has a $14 billion deficit planned, largely due to the U.S. trade war.
Now is the time to seize the moment. Status quo is no longer an option. It's time for us to become the most competitive economy in the G7.
The $232 billion budget promises some tariff relief programs, including a relief fund and tax deferral program for affected businesses, plus money for supporting communities that experience mass layoffs. The province also lowered its revenue expectations for the next few years. At the sexual assault trial of 5 former World Junior players, the jury saw a group chat where teammates discussed an investigation by Hockey Canada. Katie Nicholson was in court today, and a warning: some of the content in her story is graphic.
Feeds it back at the point. Timmins in, looking for a stick to score! Steenbergen gives Canada the lead!
Tyler Steenbergen's gold medal game winner at the 2018 World Juniors. 7 years later, he found himself testifying about some of his former teammates. Michael McLeod, Alex Fermenton, Carter Hart, Dylan Dubé, and Cal Foote are all charged with sexually assaulting a woman known as EM. They've all pleaded not guilty. Steenbergen testified about a naked woman in McLeod's room, who he said asked the men to have sex with her. He said he saw her give Hart and McLeod oral sex, and that he saw Dubé slap her butt. Foote is accused of doing the splits naked across the woman's face. Steenbergen said he could not see whether Foote was clothed. Steenbergen then walked through a series of messages from a group chat involving 11 players who were in the room that night, started after they learned Hockey Canada was looking into the matter. We all need to say the same thing if we get interviewed. Can't have different stories or make anything up, McLeod wrote. Later in the chat, Dubé wrote, let's not make her sound like too crazy, because if she gets wind of this, and then she can get even more angry, and we don't need that. A message from Hart reads, honestly, boys, nobody did anything wrong. Like, we got consent to anything that she did. She was the one begging for guys to bang her.
It's really an unvarnished look at what these players were thinking at the time.
George Gray is a Toronto-based criminal defense lawyer who isn't involved in the trial.
Often what a Crown is trying to prove when they rely on evidence that postdates the offense, that the way this person is acting in the days following the offense shows consciousness of guilt, meaning that they're sort of aware that they did something wrong.
Steenbergen also testified he received 2 calls, one from Dubé and one from Foote, both asking him not to tell Hockey Canada investigators what they did, that they would do that themselves.
Steenbergen's testimony was cut short when another matter arose. The justice sent the jury home so that the lawyers could address the issue. Katie Nicholson, CBC News, London, Ontario.
Palestinian medics say that Israeli strikes killed at least 114 people in the Gaza Strip today, many of them in the city of Han Yunis. I gave them dinner and they went to sleep. Normal day. It was a normal day, said this mother, struggling to comprehend the death of her 2 sons. Several children from multiple families were among the dead and wounded. Medics say airstrikes hit homes and tents as Israel's military offensive against Hamas continues in Gaza, along with a 10-week-old blockade of food and humanitarian aid. Well, lawyers for Sean Combs have begun cross-examination of the rapper's former girlfriend, the key witness called to the stand by the prosecution. Chris Reyes now on a critical day in this high-profile trial.
Sean Diddy Combs' sons and mother arrived in court for another day.
Justin, how are you doing today?
This time for the cross-examination of his ex-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura. Ventura has already given 2 days of testimony in which she said she was directed by Combs to perform humiliating sex acts with male escorts in so-called freak-offs. On the stand, the defense focused their questions on dozens of messages that suggest Ventura didn't always reject them. In 2009, she wrote to Combs, "I'm always ready to freak off, LOL."
There's no question that really she participated in these activities, which sound horrific. The question is whether or not it was consensual.
Those activities are central to the accusations against the music mogul, that he used his business enterprise for criminal activity, including coercing sex and prostitution charges. Combs' lawyers admit his relationship with Ventura was toxic, but argue it was always consensual. In other messages shown to the jury, the former couple professed their love and passion for each other. Combs once wrote to Ventura, "I love you so much, it makes me cry."
Jurors are going to be fundamentally confronted with these two different versions, these two different character portrayals of who Cassie Ventura is, and ultimately decide what it is. The complication of the relationship is a key point for the defense.
When asked about how Ventura handled cross-examination, her lawyer said she's holding up great.
The one thing about her testimony really is there's no credibility issues with her. The facts are the facts. She's telling them as they are, her truth.
Ventura's testimony continues Friday. This trial is expected to last 8 weeks. Combs has pleaded not guilty to all charges. If convicted, he could face life in prison. Chris Reyes, CBC News, New York.
There's some cautious optimism tonight on the overdose crisis, with data showing the number of deaths declining.
Feels like there's less reports of overdoses. There's more people who are coming around for longer.
Why some are warning it's still too early to celebrate. Next. Plus, 25 years after the Walkerton water crisis.
The doctors told me probably the day or two after she got there that she probably wasn't going to live.
The lasting legacy of a small town tragedy. And later, at a BC animal sanctuary, an unlikely bond.
Friendships can come from anywhere, and you just have to be open for them.
How a chicken and a pig became best friends. We're back in 2. Measles cases in Canada have risen again. Ontario says 182 more people were infected over the last week. That brings the province's total case count to more than 1,600 since an outbreak began in October. Alberta has now surpassed 400 infections with 14 new cases. As of last week, there have been 35 hospitalizations. The highly contagious disease is mainly infecting unvaccinated children, infants, and teenagers. Well, overdose deaths in this country are finally trending down, despite a slight increase in the latest numbers in BC. It is a promising sign, but those working in harm reduction say the national drug crisis is still really far from over. Georgie Smythe explains why.
In Vancouver's downtown east side, hope of an end to the drug crisis is fragile, but data shows deaths are trending down.
I've noticed that quite a bit. Actually, people actually wake up more naturally on their own.
Observers have seen drops of 12% in BC, 12% Canada-wide, and a huge 27% in the US. And no one really knows why. Labs like this one are testing their theories. Maybe the drug supply got less toxic, people's survivability increased, or interventions like life-saving opioid reversal drugs and treatments are making an impact.
Our initial reaction was skepticism. It doesn't feel real until you hear the stories on the street, and they're saying, yeah, we have feels like there's less reports of overdoses. There's more people who are coming around for longer. People aren't disappearing anymore.
Something is working, they say, but abrupt challenges to the drug supply could threaten that, like tariff-driven fentanyl crackdowns.
The worst thing we could do right now is crack down too quickly on fentanyl.
If it becomes hard to get fentanyl, then there'll probably be other drugs that flood the market. What would be the next drug? If it's carfentanil, then we're worse off.
Carfentanil is 100 times more potent than fentanyl, which is why those in harm reduction say actions against supply and distribution should be calculated and measured.
So you're saying that any change to supply has a big impact on you?
It will. It's gonna. You're gonna see the crime rate go right up.
My life is at risk. Just remember that we're all somebody's brother, sister, daughter, son. We're all regular people that have been subjected to a shitty situation.
Getting the balance right in the overdose crisis, more important than ever in the light of precious progress. Georgie Smythe, CBC News, Vancouver.
It's been a quarter of a century since a contaminated water system in a small Ontario town made many sick and killed 7 people.
We took water completely for granted and pretty well did everything wrong you could do.
The lasting legacy in the community and far beyond. Plus, after the break, Rosie's here with that issue.
Hey, Adrian, tonight we're going to talk about Mark Carney's cabinet.
We're going to deliver that mandate with a new team, purpose-built for this hinge moment in Canada's history.
What does Carney's cabinet tell us about his priorities for this government and the country? Althea Raj, Aaron Wary, and Rob Russo join me to talk about that and more.
This is an artist's reconstruction of what researchers believe may have been one of the first animals to emerge from the ocean and live on land. Australian scientists have identified the oldest known fossil footprints of a reptile-like animal dated around 350 million years ago. Previously, the earliest known reptile footprints were found in Nova Scotia and estimated to be 318 million years old. Well, this month marks 25 years since Canada's worst E. coli contamination tragedy. The small Ontario town of Walkerton saw 7 people die when the local water system became tainted. Lisa Xing shows us the lessons the community doesn't want to forget.
Trudy Fraser hasn't drank tap water in more than 2 decades.
You lose that trust when you see people have passed away, people you know that passed away and were very ill, and your own family, what they went through.
In May of 2000, a heavy rainstorm washed cow manure carrying a deadly strain of E. coli into a well in Walkerton, Ontario, about 3 hours north of Toronto. Improper chlorination, a lack of training, and checks and balances due to budget cuts caused the bacteria to quickly taint the town's water supply. It ravaged residents for days before officials announced there was an outbreak. 7 people died, including a toddler. More than 2,000 were sick, about half the town. Fraser says her daughter, Alyssa, was one of the people, vomiting bile.
It was terrifying. The doctors told me, probably the day or 2 after she got there, that she probably wasn't going to live.
Fraser is thankful her daughter survived. Many are still living with the consequences. Gastrointestinal illnesses like IBS, others have permanent liver damage. Alyssa lost a portion of her kidney.
And she doesn't remember a lot of it, thank heavens. She does not remember a lot.
From the trauma,
yeah,
you think?
Yeah.
So this is the memorial plaque for well 5.
It's understandable why the town might want to forget, but Bruce Davidson says it's also essential to remember the lessons, co-founder of a citizens group that pushed for answers.
We took water completely for granted and pretty well did everything wrong you could do.
In 2002, the Walkerton Inquiry recommendations revolutionized how the province protects drinking water sources. It set standards for testing, treatment, and training for water systems operators.
Every operator in Ontario has come through.
As part of that work, the Walkerton Clean Water Centre opened in 2004.
It makes a huge difference. So I'd say prior to the tragedy, a lot of small communities didn't have access to that training.
Now, every spring, Fraser spends afternoons at this memorial. A tragedy that left an indelible mark on her family, but does not define them nor their community. Lisa Shing, CBC News, Walkerton, Ontario.
Now, let's break down the news shaping our world. Rosie's here with that issue.
At issue tonight, Mark Carney's new cabinet. The Prime Minister unveiled his team to try to strengthen the Canadian economy and fight a trade war.
We're going to deliver that mandate with a new team, purpose-built for this hinge moment in Canada's history.
But Pierre Poilievre says there are too many familiar faces.
14 Trudeau ministers are now in Carney's cabinet. It's more of the same when Canada needs real change.
So what's to be made of Mark Carney's cabinet? What do his choices tell us about his priorities for the government? I'm Rosemary Barton, here to break it all down tonight. I've done a cabinet shuffle of my own a little bit. Althea Raj is here. Aaron Wary is in for Andrew Coyne, and in for Chantal Hébert is Rob Russo. But delighted to have you all here. Althea, I'm going to start with you. What did you think of when you saw the people that Mark Carney put in both the front bench and others? What was sort of the thought that you had about what he was trying to do there?
Number one, make as many people as possible happy, which is why we have this 28-member cabinet, which is larger than his initial cabinet. And we have secretaries of state, which we haven't had for a very long time, which is not really a make-work project, but it's like a junior minister that will still get the perks of being a minister. Unfortunate for Mr. Carney that because of the order of precedent, the image was the old Trudeau cabinet right in front of him at Rideau Hall, as opposed to all the new people that were sitting behind the people who'd been there longer. There are familiar faces in key positions, but I think you want to have people with experience who know how to drive change in their departments. If you hearken back to 2015, a lot of those ministers kind of struggled in the early years. There were a couple of faux pas. There were some cabinet shuffles to put them into new positions, to give them longer time to get a feel for how to drive change. And he doesn't have that time. So I think it's normal that and natural that he would have a set of experienced hand. I do think for people who are upset, and there are a lot of people in caucus who are upset, there is an interesting message about who's in the inner circle and who's out of the inner circle. And it's like, who is Mark Carney's friends and who's friends with his friends and who helped him get to where he is and who has fundraised for him. It will be interesting to see whether the anger at the moment festers or if it calms down when they all return to work in 2 weeks.
Yeah, and what he does to manage that. Some of the conversation too, Aaron, has been, okay, there is not a lot of change, but if the change at the top is so significant, maybe that will catalyze, to use one of the Prime Minister's words, catalyze change in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important question going forward, is how Mark Carney runs his cabinet and how Mark Carney runs this government, and whether, his leadership and direction and, perhaps demand for results leads to a different level of performance, I guess you could say, in the government. I do think 2015 is an interesting counterpoint comparison to this because, Justin Trudeau came in and he had all of these new ministers and they'd all had very impressive resumes and from outside of government, and it was sort of sold as a virtue. But I think then once the government got into office, they realized that having all of these rookies in senior positions in the government actually made things harder in some ways. And so I think there's I can understand why this Prime Minister in particular, someone who himself is essentially a rookie MP, would rely on some experienced people in those major files. I think the question is sort of how the government itself functions going forward, and whether Mark Carney sort of drives it in a way that maybe we didn't see in the last one.
Rob?
Yeah, on that last point, I'm told that in many instances it won't matter who's in the cabinet positions because the Prime Minister believes that he is the one to drive Canada-US relations, that he is the one to drive the restructuring of the economy, that he has the contacts internationally, he has the experience. The things that strike me about this group is, number one, it pays to be a tormentor of Justin Trudeau. Wayne Long, Joe Lightbound, Chrystia Freeland, all got into this cabinet. It pays to be opportunistic. Anita Anand and Sean Fraser after wanting to spend time with their families, decided 15 minutes was long enough with their families and came back to politics because there was a chance of getting reelected. So opportunism pays. It does tell us, I think, a little bit about some of Mr. Carney's vulnerabilities. The people from Quebec who are playing a large role, some of them might have been expected to be dropped, particularly if you're in Western Canada, you might have wanted to see Mr. Guilbeault dropped. But it's Guilbeault, Champagne, and Joly. I think they're there because I think Mr. Carney, from what I understand, understands he doesn't know the province of Quebec as perhaps as well as his predecessor did, surely, and it's a vulnerability, and he needs people who understand the ground in Quebec, given the results of Quebec, given that Quebec has given him that muscular minority that he has now as well.
Yeah, I mean, you do have to do some of that too when you're making a cabinet, Althea. You do have to reward some people, sort of pay some people back. That is part of what's going on here too, for sure.
I think the Guilbeault example is interesting because the former environment minister, who's now the Minister of Canadian Identity, was basically slammed by the Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, today as being a threat to Canadian identity. Yeah. Yesterday, I think it's yesterday, in the lead up to cabinet, he made some comments about the pipeline, basically arguing that there is no need for an additional oil pipeline because the one the government built, taxpayers built, that you and I and everybody else paid for, isn't operating at full capacity, and there is no corporation lining up to build another one at the moment. East-West is the one that we keep talking about. And Monsieur Blanchet, the Bloc leader, had a press conference and said, well, I agree with Stephen Guilbeault. And so you see that tension that is playing out, that exists within the Liberal Party, that exists within this country. But I think we all need to remember that the Liberals won 44 seats in Quebec. They have the most seats in the province. And they probably would not be in government were it not for that. And so he does need to absolutely speak to that and to allow those cabinet ministers the space to speak. I think the tension that is going to come is if Mr. Carney wants to be the Prime Minister and the decision maker of all things and to not have a cabinet government, which is not what he said actually earlier this week, how does he exert discipline? Because you now have people who feel like they were in their position because they have opinions and they can talk, and we saw kind of the chaos emerge from that this week where everybody was venturing in their own direction and commenting on this, that, and the other thing. It'll be very interesting to see if he tries to empower people and like say you can speak but stay in your lane, or if this is like a Stephen Harper type government where you're only allowed to say what the Prime Minister's office says you're allowed to say.
Aaron, and what's your impression on what will happen on that front?
Yeah, I think everyone says they want cabinet government and empowered ministers until those ministers start speaking and saying their piece, and then suddenly everyone realizes, oh right, message discipline has its uses. I think, for all the talk about experience in cabinet, I think actually the two most interesting and possibly important appointments are two rookies, essentially. Tim Hodgson at Natural Resources seems to be very close to Mr. Carney, worked at Goldman Sachs, but I think crucially was a member of the board for a major oil sands producer. I think that, he'd be in an interesting position regardless, but I think his background makes it particularly interesting about how this government's going to deal with Alberta. And then I think the other one is housing. Rob mentioned a couple of people who came back and decided they didn't need to spend so much time with their families. One of the people who did also come back was Nate Erskine-Smith, at least under Justin Trudeau's request to be housing minister. And then Mark Carney has now dumped him. And Mark Carney has instead put Gregor Robertson in that position, who I have learned over the last few days, while the rest of Canada kind of sees him as an impressive former mayor of Vancouver, people in Vancouver and BC are not so fond of his record, particularly on housing in Vancouver. And so I think that is an interesting position for him to be in. And I think it's also important to remember that, for everything else that's going on, I don't know that there's a domestic file that's as important as housing for this government. And so that puts a lot of pressure on Gregor Robertson to get it right.
About a minute to you, Rob.
What struck me in terms of those left out, I was struck by Carlos Letao being left out. I think he was probably struck by that as well. Jean-Yves Duclos' exclusion makes sense if Mr. Lightbound is coming in and he's kind of like the next wave. There are 3 or 4 people who are feeling hurt. Nate Erskine-Smith has made his bitterness public. I think Mr. Jonathan Wilkinson is feeling surprised. I think Karina Gould is surprised. I think they're also surprised because they didn't get a call. I think they had to pick up the phone themselves when they didn't get a call and ask, is no call coming? And they were basically then told, yeah, no call is coming. So I think the way that was handled probably hurt them as much as anything else. Mr. Hodgson is the guy to watch.
Yeah.
He has the Prime Minister's ear. Worked together at Goldman Sachs, worked together at the Bank of Canada. Yeah. If there is one person who will not have the PM looking over his shoulder, I think it's Tim Hodgson.
Okay, we're going to leave that part there. Good conversation, everyone. Thank you. When we come back, we're going to take a look at the Liberal government's decision to not deliver a budget.
I want to be prudent. I want to present something to Canadians that they can trust.
Mr. Champagne there talking to David Cochrane. What's to be made of the decision to not release a budget? What does it say about the Liberals' economic plans? That's next. At issue, the budget. The finance minister says the government will move quickly on tax relief for Canadians.
The first step of this government is a middle-class tax cut. That's the first thing. You start with that. Then you say, well, you need to have a throne speech to say what are the priorities of the government. And once you've done that, then you do an economic statement, which is going to be the fall economic statement.
Meaning there will not be a budget anytime soon.
If he does indeed have a plan, if he does know what he's doing, then he would introduce a budget so that Canadians know exactly what the finances are.
So what's to be made of this decision to not release a budget right now? How are the Liberals justifying it? Let's bring everyone back. Althea, Aaron, and Rob. I'm going to make Aaron start on this because I made him talk about it in the newsroom today. Does this matter? I guess, Aaron, is the first question. Or what does this tell us in terms of what the government is thinking? Because in my mind, they haven't really justified this in a substantive way yet.
Yeah, I think their explanations are a little all over the place. I mean, I do think, you know, to be clear, a government doesn't need to present a budget to function.
Sure.
And budgets as they are now in their kind of current form are sort of 90% political communications documents. You know, the government can still function. And to that end, you know, it usually takes 6 to 7 months for a budget to sort of be put together and rolled out. So it's not entirely surprising that they have said we can't get a budget out in, you know, the 4 weeks that are currently on the House of Commons calendar. Of course, it should be noted the House of Commons calendar could be extended and they could sit through the summer. But I think the other part of it is that, you know, in addition to being a political document, it's also an update on a budget. It's typically an update on the economic and fiscal situation of the country. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that there's anything really stopping the government from putting something like that out. Like, again, to go back to 2015, the Trudeau government was sworn in on, I think it was November 4th, and 2 weeks later they had an economic and fiscal projection update from Bill Morneau, a rookie finance minister. Now, that may be because they wanted to get some bad news out, and you can argue that now there's more uncertainty, but it's still possible, and it gets you around the idea that you're maybe not being transparent and upfront with Canadians.
Yeah, and maybe that will happen, Rob, because I would think that a government that is trying to project that it is serious and aggressive about the economy would also want to be forthcoming about the state of the economy, even if it's not going to put a full budget on the table.
You're absolutely right, Rosemary. If you want to prepare Canadians for some of the bold decisions that the Prime Minister says Canada needs to make over the next little while, you would think it would behoove the government to try and lay out some of the stakes. What's going on? The state and the stakes of the economy. It would seem to be to their advantage. You look at what's happening with Honda. You look at Nancy Southern, CEO of ATCO in Alberta, saying that already, because of the sovereignty debate in Alberta, South Korean and Japanese money is hesitating or staying on the sidelines. So there are things happening with two of the big priorities I think that the Prime Minister has: national unity, number one, and the United States and its impact, tariff impact on our economy, number two. But if anybody knows the dangers of a quickly, perhaps bumptiously delivered economic statement, it should be Mark Carney. Mark Carney is Prime Minister, in effect, because an economic statement was rushed in and it was bungled and bumbled in December. It led to the resignation of Chrystia Freeland, which created Mark Carney's candidacy when he decided to stay out of government that way. So he knows the dangers, but there are opportunities. And for context, the quickest budget ever brought in after a government was elected was Paul Martin's in 2003. The person who took the longest was Stephen Harper in 2007. He took 9 months to bring in a budget.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's hard for the Conservatives to criticize, I guess, then, Althea, if Stephen Harper, who's also a strong fiscal manager of the country, took that long. But it does open them up to criticism, I think, first of all.
Well, they should be criticized for it. I mean, it's outrageous to think that the government would not table a budget in this entire calendar year. Even in COVID, when the Liberals tried to suggest that they wanted carte blanche from the opposition so that they wouldn't have to table a budget, that was nuts. I'm sorry, but for Minister Champagne to say, well, he doesn't want to table something that's not accurate, well, then he should not be a politician and he should become a historian. Stuff moves in real time. And it's a snapshot in time. And at the very least, he should be bringing forward a pared down version of a budget in September. I understand that, this is kind of, the cabinet making was rushed. I think we see that by what has happened this week. And some people who even themselves seem surprised that they are in certain positions that they have been put in. There is a throne speech that is, that requires a lot of work from the public servants as well. And a budget is a lot of work for the public service to do.
Sure.
But you have all summer to do it. A fall economic statement in September that frankly will be outdated a few weeks later too, but it's also about respecting Parliament. It's about you ran on being the economic stewards and having more economic cred than Pierre Poilievre, and the first action is telling Canadians, no, you're not going to take Parliament seriously enough to introduce a budget and give people a snapshot of where you're going and how much it's going to cost and what you think the challenges are in the future. No, it's completely inappropriate, and the Conservatives are right. And the other opposition parties should probably gang on and complain that the government is railroading and acting in completely unacceptable ways. And this is not a standard that you want to set, because the next government will do exactly the same thing.
Aaron, do you think that this is something that will stick, or is it, I don't know, is it something that Canadians are like, oh, well, they'll get to it? I don't know. We're in strange times, right? They might be more forgiving than usual.
I think it's hard to predict exactly what the impact of this will be, but I do think that, Mark Carney has a couple things sort of going for him, or has up to this point. One is the sense that he's sort of the adult in the room, that he's a serious person, and the other is that he is prepared to act with urgency. And you can argue that they could turn the economic update in the fall into an essentially a de facto budget. But in not at least coming forward with some kind of fiscal and economic projections, not making any attempt to kind of fill the gap at this point, I think that starts to chip away at the idea that they're serious, that they're acting with urgency, that they're on top of things. They're going to sit for 4 weeks and then they're going to take 2 months off. I think that they have to kind of continue the momentum rather than sort of put their feet up this summer.
Thank you all. Thank you all for being here and pinch hitting for two of you. That is at issue on The National. We're going to continue this conversation and talk about the Bloc's calls for a recount in Montreal. You can catch that on YouTube or the At Issue podcast. Now back to Adrian in Toronto.
Thanks, Rosie. When we come back, an unlikely friendship forms at an animal sanctuary in BC.
She was the only one that he didn't shoo away, and he really, really, really likes her.
How a unique duo found each other in our moment. So this is a bit of an unlikely pair. That is Little Red, the chicken, stooped on top of Truffles, the pig. This is all happening at an animal sanctuary in Summerland, BC, in the Okanagan Valley. So after Truffles arrived last month, the two formed an instant connection, and tonight their unexpected friendship is our moment.
Truffles was an emotional support pig for a family. They had to leave the pig behind. The pig stayed with another family who ended up not being able to care for him properly.
Hi, Truffles. Come on, boy.
When he came to us, he was so overweight that the fat rolls cover his eyes, and so he couldn't see. We had a bit of a welcoming committee, mainly goats, and then some chickens.
You have all these friends coming to greet you.
And one of those was Little Red. She was the only one that he didn't shoo away, and he really, really, really likes her. She, from then on, would just start eating with him and sharing meals. Would jump on him and start grooming him. And then now they sleep together. Truffles being so large and she's pretty small, and then if they sleep together, you're a little bit worried about the chicken getting squished. I don't know whether it's just, I want to say two outcasts, but they're not really, but maybe they feel that way. If a chicken and a pig can be such good friends, why can't people just get along together? Friendships can come from anywhere, and you just have to be open for them.
Well, exactly. Also, that little snore is amazing. And apparently, it's not that strange for chickens and pigs to get along, but one chicken and one pig, that's odd. From all of us at The National, thank you for being with us. You can watch anywhere, anytime on the free CBC News app and subscribe to The National's YouTube channel. I'm Adrienne Arsenault. Take care.